April 15th, 1943. 25,000 feet over occupied Belgium. Captain Werner Schroer of Jagdgeschwader 26 rolls his Focke-Wulf 190 into position, preparing to intercept the American fighter formation approaching from the west. Then he sees them. His radio crackles with disbelief. The Americans are flying barrels. Compared to the sleek, angular lines of his FW-190, these new American fighters look absurd. Massive radial engines jutting from thick fuselages. Short, stubby wings, cockpits that seem to sit on top of the aircraft like afterthoughts. They look less like fighters and more like flying freight cars. Schroer has been flying combat missions for 2 years. He knows what a fighter should look like, and these Republic P-47 Thunderbolts aren't it. The Germans have a point. The P-47 is the largest, heaviest single-engine fighter anyone has ever built. When fully loaded with fuel, ammunition, and pilot, it weighs 17,500 pounds, 8.5 tons of aircraft trying to do what nimble 3-ton Spitfires and 4-ton Messerschmitts do naturally. For context, that's more than twice the weight of a Spitfire Mark V. The British pilots stationed in England with the American 8th Air Force are already joking about it. When the 4th Fighter Group transitions from their beloved Spitfires to Thunderbolts in January 1943, the ribbing starts immediately. One RAF pilot quips that if a Luftwaffe fighter attacks a P-47 pilot, the American can just unbuckle his harness and run around inside the fuselage to hide. It's funny because it feels true. The P-47's fuselage is massive, nearly twice the internal volume of a Spitfire. The Americans are putting pilots into aircraft that seem designed for carrying cargo, not fighting dogfights. One Thunderbolt pilot describes his first impression as flying a bathtub around the sky. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The skepticism isn't just about aesthetics. The weight creates real performance problems. At low to medium altitudes, where most air combat happens, the P-47 accelerates like a truck pulling a trailer. Its rate of climb is sluggish. In turns, it bleeds energy fast, wallowing through maneuvers that lighter fighters complete with grace. German intelligence officers reviewing early combat reports note these weaknesses with satisfaction. The Americans have built a fighter optimized for high-altitude work, they conclude, but high-altitude combat is rare. Most engagements happen between 10,000 and 20,000 feet, where the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 dominate. The P-47 will be easy prey. The psychology runs deeper than tactical analysis. German pilots in 1943 are experienced, confident, and accustomed to winning. They've faced the RAF's best and survived. They've adapted to British tactics, learned the Spitfire's strengths and weaknesses. They've been controlling European skies for 4 years. Now the Americans arrive with an aircraft that violates every principle of fighter design. Speed, climb rate, maneuverability. These are what matter in air combat. The P-47 trades, all of them for size and weight. It carries 8 50 caliber machine guns, which sounds impressive until you realize those guns and their 3,400 rounds of ammunition add over 1,000 pounds to an already overweight aircraft. The Luftwaffe's initial assessment isn't wrong. Exactly. It's incomplete. The P-47 does have problems. It does struggle at low altitude. It does climb slower than German fighters. But German pilots are about to discover that modern air combat doesn't happen in a vacuum where only climb rate and turn radius matter. The P-47 exists because American engineers asked a different question. Not how do we build the most maneuverable fighter, but how do we build a fighter that brings pilots home? Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born designer at Republic Aviation, approached the problem with brutal pragmatism. His fighter would be big because big aircraft could house big engines, large fuel tanks, heavy armor, and redundant systems. The heart of the design is the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 radial rows, generating 2,000 horsepower at takeoff and over 2,500 with water injection. This engine doesn't just move the aircraft, it powers a turbo-supercharger system that changes the physics of high-altitude flight. Most piston engines lose power as altitude increases because air gets thinner. The supercharger solves this by compressing incoming air before it reaches the cylinders, maintaining sea-level pressure even at 30,000 feet. The P-47's supercharger sits in the rear fuselage, connected to the engine by ducting that runs the length of the aircraft. This is why the fuselage is so large. The bottom third is essentially a flying air compressor. The system gives the P-47 something no other Allied fighter has in early 1943. Full power at altitudes where German fighters are gasping for air. At 27,000 feet, the Thunderbolt's engine reaches maximum output, while a Bf-109 or FW-190 is operating at reduced capacity. Above 30,000 feet, the performance gap becomes a chasm. But altitude advantage means nothing if you can't use it tactically, and in April 1943, nobody's figured out how to use it yet. The 8th Air Force sends its new Thunderbolts on their first combat mission March 10th. 14 P-47s accompanied by 12 Spitfires fly a fighter sweep over France. The mission is a disaster. Radio malfunctions plague the formation. German fighters ignore them entirely. The Thunderbolts return to England having accomplished nothing except proving they can cross the Channel without falling apart. The radio problems get fixed. British equipment replaces the faulty American systems. Missions resume April 8th. Still nothing. German fighters remain scarce, uninterested in engaging an untested American type. Then April 15th arrives. Major Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group spots a Focke-Wulf 190 at altitude. He rolls in, fires a burst from 600 yards, and watches the German fighter stagger, smoke, and spiral toward the ground. First kill. The P-47 has drawn blood. But one victory doesn't change the narrative. German pilots still view the Thunderbolt as a curiosity, an American design mistake that will be corrected once the industrial behemoth realizes nimble European fighters require European design sensibilities. What the Germans don't see yet is the infrastructure supporting these heavy fighters. American production capacity is ramping up to unprecedented levels. Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale, New York, is preparing to build Thunderbolts at rates that will make the aircraft's weight irrelevant through sheer numbers. If one P-47 is too heavy to be effective, what about 10, 100, 1,000? By summer 1943, P-47s are flowing into the European theatre in steady streams. The 56th Fighter Group, the 78th Fighter Group, the 352nd Fighter Group. Each squadron brings more pilots who need to learn how to fight in an aircraft that doesn't behave like anything they trained on. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke takes command of the 56th Fighter Group and immediately recognizes the challenge. His pilots are dying in training accidents, struggling to adapt to the Thunderbolt's weight and size. 41 aircraft lost before they ever see combat. 18 pilots dead learning to fly a fighter that handles like nothing they've experienced. Zemke is a pragmatist. He served as an observer with the Royal Air Force in 1940, watched the Battle of Britain from the ground, understands that air combat has evolved beyond simple dogfighting. He starts teaching his pilots to fight differently. Don't try to turn with Bf-109s. Don't try to climb with FW-190s. Use what the Thunderbolt does well, and what it does well is dive. The P-47's weight, its greatest liability in level flight, becomes its most lethal asset in vertical maneuvers. When a 7-ton aircraft points its nose down and adds power, physics takes over. The Thunderbolt accelerates faster than any German fighter can follow. Zemke drills his pilots on boom and zoom tactics. Dive on the enemy from altitude. Fire one burst. Keep diving. Use your speed to create separation. Then climb back to altitude using the energy from your dive. Never get into a turning fight. Never try to outclimb an opponent. Always maintain the initiative through vertical maneuvering. The tactics sound simple. In practice, they require discipline that contradicts every fighter pilot instinct. When an enemy fighter is in front of you damaged, smoking, every impulse screams to stay on him, finish the kill. Zemke's pilots learn to ignore that impulse. Fire, dive, separate. The kill confirmation doesn't matter if you get jumped by his wingman while you're circling at slow speed. By June 1943, the 56 Fighter Group is starting to figure it out. Robert Johnson, a pilot who failed gunnery school and wasn't expected to survive combat, develops a feel for the Thunderbolt's strengths. He learns to use the aircraft's exceptional roll rate, something most pilots haven't noticed yet because they're too focused on what the P-47 can't do. The Thunderbolt rolls faster than it has any right to. German pilots attempting to evade by rolling and pulling hard discover that the massive American fighter follows them through the roll with deceiving speed. The ailerons are effective even at high speeds where other aircraft's controls stiffen up. This gives P-47 pilots one more option in the vertical fight. Dive, roll, pull up into a climb, roll back to check 6, dive again. Johnson flies his first missions in January 1943 and nearly proves Zemke's doubts correct. He makes rookie mistakes, gets separated from his formation, almost gets killed. Then something clicks. Over 91 combat missions, he encounters German fighters 43 times. In 36 of those encounters, he fires his guns. 37 German aircraft take hits. Between 27 and 32 go down, depending on which records you trust. Those numbers reveal something important. Johnson isn't a natural pilot. He's not blessed with innate gunnery skill. What he has is the ability to recognize patterns and adapt, tactics. He figures out that German fighters attack in predictable ways. He learns to position his aircraft so his targets fly into his bullet stream, rather than trying to track them through deflection angles. Other pilots are learning similar lessons. The P-47's 850 caliber machine guns deliver devastating firepower if you can get them on target. Unlike cannon-armed German fighters that rely on a few high-explosive shells connecting, the Thunderbolt pilot can walk his tracers into an enemy aircraft. Miss with the first burst. Adjust. Fire again. The ammunition load is generous enough to make multiple passes, but the real revelation comes from combat damage assessment. P-47s are coming home with battle damage that should have killed them. Cannon shells punching through wings, flak shrapnel riddling fuselages, engine cylinders blown apart. The aircraft keep flying, pilots keep landing. The radial engine is the key. Unlike inline liquid-cooled engines where a single coolant line hit means engine failure, the R2800 can lose multiple cylinders and continue running. The massive oil reservoir provides redundancy. The rugged construction absorbs punishment. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer later admits the P-47 could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. Handled carefully. That's the shift. By late 1943, German pilots are no longer dismissing the Thunderbolt as a flying barrel. They're treating it as a serious threat that requires different tactics. The joke about Americans hiding in their fuselages has stopped being funny. July 19, 1943. Robert Johnson is escorting bombers over Germany when a Focke-Wulf 190 jumps him from above. Johnson takes hits before he can react. His aircraft is shredded, canopy blown apart, controls damaged, fuel leaking. He's at low altitude over enemy territory with a German pilot determined to finish him off. The FW-190 makes pass after pass. Johnson's aircraft won't climb, won't maneuver, barely stays airborne. His guns are jammed. He can't fight back. He can only try to survive. The German pilot empties his ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Hundreds of rounds. The aircraft absorbs everything. Wings shot full of holes, fuselage torn open, tail surfaces mangled. Johnson makes it back to England, barely. His aircraft is written off as unsalvageable. He walks away. The image of his damaged Thunderbolt becomes legendary, visual proof that Republic built something that refuses to die. But more importantly, German pilots who hear about the engagement start to understand. You can hit these American fighters repeatedly, and they keep coming. By autumn 1943, the P-47 has transitioned from curiosity to problem. The 8th Air Force is escorting bomber formations deeper into Germany. Thunderbolts are everywhere. German fighter commanders can no longer pick their engagements, can no longer wait for favorable conditions. The Americans force combat through sheer presence. The psychological warfare is subtle but effective. Every bomber formation has P-47 escorts. German pilots know that attacking means engaging aircraft designed to take punishment and keep fighting. The calculation changes. Is this target worth risking combat with fighters that won't go down easy? But the Thunderbolt still has one critical limitation that the Luftwaffe exploits relentlessly: range. With internal fuel only, a P-47 can escort bombers about 300 miles into Europe before fuel constraints force them to turn back. Beyond that point, bomber formations fly alone, and that's where German fighters are waiting. The fighter line becomes a grim boundary. American escort fighters peel away like clockwork. Bomber crews watch their protection disappear, then watch German fighters appear. The losses are brutal and unsustainable. 20% casualty rates on some deep penetration missions. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids in August cost 60 B-17s. The second Schweinfurt mission in October, 77 more. Fighter command experiments with solutions. External drop tanks extend range, but the early models are unreliable. They don't feed fuel properly. They create drag. They sometimes don't release when empty, forcing pilots to land with external tanks still attached, a dangerous maneuver that damages landing gear. The problem isn't just technical, it's doctrinal. Fighter pilots are trained to chase kills, to break formation, and pursue targets of opportunity. Bomber escort requires staying close to the bombers, even when German fighters appear in your peripheral vision. It requires letting potential kills escape, because your job isn't to rack up victories. Your job is to keep bombers alive. This is where the P-47's reputation starts to split. In the bomber community, it becomes the reliable workhorse. The fighter that shows up, stays close, and brings everyone home. In the fighter pilot community, it remains controversial. Heavy, ungainly, limited in range, unsuited for the glory of air-to-air combat. The North American P-51 Mustang is coming, and everyone knows it. A lighter fighter with longer range and better maneuverability. When it arrives in numbers in 1944, it will replace the Thunderbolt in the escort role. The P-47 will be relegated to ground attack, a demotion that seems to confirm everything critics said about its design. Except that's not how the story ends. The ground attack role, the mission everyone views as secondary, is about to become the most important air combat mission in Europe. And the Thunderbolt, the fighter derided for being too heavy, will prove that weight isn't a liability when you're diving through anti-aircraft fire to destroy tanks, trains, and troops. November 1943, Major Francis Gabreski leads the 61st Fighter Squadron on a bomber escort mission. They arrive to find the bomber formation already under attack. German fighters are everywhere. Gabreski spots a Messerschmitt Bf-110 and dives. 700 yards, he opens fire. 8 50 caliber machine guns converge. The German fighter explodes. Minutes later, another Bf-110. Gabreski throttles up, the massive Pratt & Whitney responding instantly. He fires. Wing root hit. The aircraft spirals down in flames. November 26, 1943. Major Gabi Gabreski becomes an ace. 5 kills, all in the P-47. This is the pattern that repeats across the European theatre. Pilots who learn to fight in the Thunderbolt's strengths rather than against its limitations. Pilots who understand that modern air combat isn't about dogfighting grace. It's about energy management, firepower, and survivability. The 56th Fighter Group becomes legendary for their Thunderbolt expertise. By war's end, they'll claim nearly 1,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, more than any other fighter unit in the 8th Air Force. 7 of the top 10 American aces in Europe will fly P-47s. The aircraft dismissed as too heavy will produce more aces than any other American fighter type. But the transformation isn't complete yet. The real test is still coming. The mission that will define the P-47's legacy isn't in the skies at 25,000 feet. It's at ground level, where heavy aircraft and powerful engines matter more than anything else. March 1944. The 9th Air Force is expanding rapidly in preparation for Operation Overlord. While the 8th Air Force keeps its focus on bomber escort, the 9th is building a different kind of air power: tactical support, close air support, fighter-bomber operations. Everything the P-47 was supposedly too heavy to do effectively. Except nobody told the Thunderbolt pilots. They're already experimenting. Belly shackles carry 500-pound bombs on short-range missions. Pilots returning from escort duty spot German convoys and strafe them, discovering that 850 caliber machine guns firing into trucks and trains produce spectacular destruction. The weight that made the P-47 ungainly in dogfights makes it stable during diving attacks. The aircraft can carry ordnance that would overload lighter fighters. A fully loaded P-47 in ground attack configuration carries 2,500 pounds of bombs, or 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, plus full ammunition for all 8 guns. That's a weapons load heavier than many medium bombers from the previous war. And here's where German assumptions about weight become their biggest mistake. They built their doctrine around the idea that heavy fighters sacrifice performance. They're right at 10,000 feet in a turning fight. They're catastrophically wrong at 300 feet in a dive-bombing run. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The 9th Air Force deploys over 2,000 aircraft in support of the invasion. P-47s patrol the Normandy beaches in continuous waves. Their mission is simple and brutal: destroy anything German trying to reach the landing zones. The weather is terrible: low clouds, limited visibility, conditions that would normally ground tactical aircraft. The Thunderbolts fly anyway. They operate in what pilots call cab rank formations, stacking up at altitude, waiting for ground controllers to call in targets. When a call comes, one flight peels off, descends through the weather, finds the target, and attacks. German defenders quickly learn to recognize the sound. That distinctive roar of the R-2800 double wasp. It means bombs and rockets are seconds away. Luftwaffe pilot Heinz Knoke writes in his diary about watching P-47s work over German positions. He describes them as flying artillery and notes they're more feared by ground troops than conventional bombers. The weight that hindered air-to-air combat creates advantages nobody predicted. The P-47 is rock steady during bomb runs. Lighter fighters bounce and wobble in turbulence at low altitude. The Thunderbolt plows through, giving pilots a stable platform for accurate weapons delivery. The massive radial engine keeps running when hit by ground fire that would kill inline engines instantly. First Lieutenant Leslie Bowes of the 358th Fighter Group survives 4 destroyed P-47s during his combat tour. Each time, battle damage that should be fatal. Each time, the aircraft brings him home, or at least gets him close enough to make a controlled crash landing. His faith in the Thunderbolt becomes absolute. He'll later call it the most underappreciated aircraft of the war. The ground attack missions reveal another unexpected advantage: the turbo-supercharger ducting that fills the lower fuselage, the design feature that makes the P-47 so large, acts as a cushion during belly landings. Pilots who lose landing gear or make emergency landings in fields discover the aircraft can slide to a stop on its belly without the fuselage breaking apart. The ducting absorbs impact energy that would tear apart aircraft with conventional layouts. July 29, 1944. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy. 405th Fighter Group spots a German column trapped near Roncy. They attack from 3:10 in the afternoon until 9:40 at night. 6.5 hours of continuous strikes. When ground forces reach the area the next morning, they count 66 tanks destroyed, 204 vehicles, 11 guns, 1 fighter group. One afternoon. Destruction that would have required multiple bomber squadrons and days of operations. The Thunderbolt has become something nobody planned for. A tank killer operating from forward airfields, turning around missions in minutes, responding to ground requests in real time. The Germans have no effective counter. Their flak defences were designed around bombers operating at altitude. Against fighters attacking at 300 feet, closing at 400 miles per hour, the flak gunners have seconds to acquire targets and almost no time to track them. The mathematical advantage that worked against slow bombers evaporates when targets approach that fast and that low. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German commanders send increasingly desperate reports to higher headquarters. The Americans have achieved air superiority so complete that daylight movement is suicidal. Convoys that try to relocate during the day are destroyed. Supply columns are annihilated. Even individual vehicles are hunted. What makes the psychological impact worse is the weight issue. German intelligence spent months in 1943 convincing frontline units that P-47s were overweight, underperforming, vulnerable. Now those same aircraft are operating with impunity, carrying weapons loads that seem impossible, absorbing damage that should destroy them, and returning to attack again and again. September 1944. The 415th Fighter Group is operating from bases in France, supporting the advance toward Germany. They fly 4 to 6 missions per day. Each pilot averages 90 to 100 combat missions before completing their tour. The sortie rate is insane, unsustainable by pre-war standards, yet the Thunderbolts keep flying. The maintenance crews perform miracles. They repair battle damage overnight. They swap engines in the field. They keep aircraft flying that should be written off. The P-47's rugged construction makes this possible. An inline engine hit by shrapnel needs extensive repair or replacement. A radial engine hit by shrapnel can often keep running, with cylinders destroyed. The redundancy is built into the design. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Germany's last major offensive in the West catches Allied forces by surprise. Bad weather grounds most aircraft for the first week. When the weather clears on December 23rd, the 9th Air Force launches everything flyable. P-47s are in the air from dawn to dusk, attacking German columns trying to exploit their breakthrough. Major John Motzenbecker leads a flight of 4 Thunderbolts along a winding river, searching for targets. He spots a road near the front, packed with German vehicles. Tanks, trucks, armoured cars, artillery pieces. The entire formation stretches for miles. He radios for reinforcements and attacks. Wave after wave of P-47s hit the column throughout the day. The Germans can't disperse because the roads are clogged with snow. They can't hide because the open terrain offers no cover. They can't shoot back effectively because the Thunderbolts are too fast and too low. By evening, the column is destroyed. Burning vehicles block the road for miles. This pattern repeats across the Ardennes. German units that made significant advances in the first week find themselves trapped by weather and air power in the second week. Panzer divisions that should be mobile are immobilized by fuel shortages and constant air attack. Every attempt to move in daylight draws immediate response from P-47s. The aircraft the Germans dismissed as too heavy is ending their offensive, not through air-to-air combat, not through strategic bombing, through relentless ground attack that destroys their logistics, kills their mobility, and makes offensive operations impossible. By January 1945, the data is overwhelming. From D-Day to VE Day, Thunderbolt pilots claim destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armoured fighting vehicles, 68,000 trucks. These numbers are claims, subject to the usual overcounting that happens in combat. Even if only half are accurate, the scale is staggering. The P-47 has flown over 746,000 combat sorties, more than any other American fighter. The loss rate is 7% per mission, absurdly low for ground attack work. For comparison, medium bombers flying similar missions lose aircraft at rates 3 to 4 times higher. The kill ratio in air-to-air combat settles at 4.6 to 1. Respectable, though not exceptional compared to other fighters. What makes this number significant is context. Most P-47 pilots in 1944 and 45 are flying ground attack missions. Air combat is incidental to their primary role. They're achieving positive kill ratios while doing work that has nothing to do with fighting other fighters. The 56th Fighter Group proves the exception. They remain with the 8th Air Force flying escort missions until war's end. They refuse to transition to P-51s, claiming the Thunderbolt is superior for their tactics. By May 1945, they've claimed 677.5 air victories. The half comes from shared kills, 311 ground kills, 128 P-47s lost to all causes. That record validates everything Zemke and his pilots figured out in 1943. The Thunderbolt works if you fight to its strengths. The 56th did exactly that and became the top-scoring fighter group in Europe. 7 American aces finished the war with 25 or more kills flying P-47s. Francis Gabreski leads with 28 aerial victories before he's shot down by ground fire in July 1944 and captured. Robert Johnson ends with 27 confirmed kills. These men aren't flying the most maneuverable fighters, they're flying the heaviest. And winning. The irony completes itself in the final months of the war. German pilots who survived from 1943 watch the evolution with bitter recognition. The aircraft they mocked as flying barrels has destroyed more German military equipment than any other Allied aircraft type. The weight they cited as a fatal flaw became the foundation of its success. Heinz Beer, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, captures this perfectly in his post-war assessment. The P-47 had to be handled very carefully. Translation from German military understatement. We were wrong about this aircraft and paid for that mistake. The final production numbers tell the story American industrial capacity wanted to tell. 15,683 P-47s built, more than any other American fighter. 2/3 reached overseas commands. They flew in every theater except Alaska. They served with the Army Air Forces, the Royal Air Force, the Soviet Air Force, the Brazilian Air Force, the Mexican Air Force. The production peak hit in 1944 when Republic's factory in Farmingdale, New York, was completing multiple aircraft per day. The workforce built Thunderbolts faster than the military could train pilots to fly them. This is what strategic air power looks like when industrial capacity backs it up. Not individual performance superiority, but overwhelming numbers of capable aircraft flown by trained pilots executing effective doctrine. The P-47 proves that weight isn't a liability if everything else is designed correctly. The massive radial engine provides power and durability. The large fuselage houses fuel, weapons, and protective systems. The rugged construction absorbs battle damage. The stable platform delivers accurate weapons. All the things that made it ungainly in 1943 make it lethal in 1944. German military doctrine valued individual aircraft performance. Climb rate, turn radius, speed at altitude. These metrics drove their fighter designs. They built aircraft optimized for air-to-air combat, where pilot skill and aircraft performance determined outcomes. That doctrine worked brilliantly in the early war, when resources were plentiful and pilot quality was high. American doctrine valued system performance. How many sorties can this aircraft fly? How much battle damage can it absorb? How quickly can it be repaired? How easy is it to produce in quantity? These questions drove the Thunderbolt's design. The result was an aircraft that worked within an industrial and logistical framework rather than depending on individual superiority. By 1945, the German approach has failed. They're building technically superior fighters like the Me-262 jet but can't produce them in meaningful numbers, can't fuel them adequately, can't train pilots to fly them effectively. The Americans are building technically adequate fighters like the P-47 and deploying them by the thousands with trained pilots, reliable logistics, and effective doctrine. The 11,874 enemy aircraft destroyed by P-47s include aircraft shot down in combat, aircraft destroyed on the ground during strafing runs, and aircraft destroyed at factories and airfields during ground attack missions. The number represents every kind of air superiority, not just dogfighting prowess, but the ability to eliminate enemy air power through multiple means. This is what the Luftwaffe couldn't adapt to. They prepared for air-to-air combat and got systematic destruction of their ground infrastructure. They optimized for fighter versus fighter engagements and faced fighters configured as bombers. They valued individual pilot kills and confronted an opponent who valued mission completion. The P-47 embodies this difference. It's not the best air-to-air fighter. The P-51 Mustang performs better in that role. It's not the best ground attack aircraft. Specialized designs might deliver more ordnance. What the Thunderbolt does is combine enough capability in both roles to be effective at whatever mission it's assigned, while remaining simple enough to produce in quantity and rugged enough to survive long enough to matter. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.